This is my video response to D. Lutkins. It's D. Lutkins 9, and he apparently had caught an error of mine in one of my videos, so I'm going to correct the error. Now, when I was a little kid, things were a little different than they are now. Obviously, I am a lot older than a lot of people think I am. I'm actually 42 years old, so you can just about imagine how things were back in the early 1970s as opposed to they are today. Okay. Now, I had always been taught that when you married somebody, boom, you automatically assumed all their debt. This was an erroneous teaching, and I'm sorry that I got this one wrong. Okay? But that's what I was taught when I was a kid. You got married, by golly, you automatically assume their debt. Obviously, in the modern day world, that isn't true. Probably what has happened is, when I was young and I was being brought up, the people who were bringing me up lived in a time in which actually it was true. There probably was, at some point, a reality that when two people got married, they just assumed each other's debts, and that was that. Times have changed, apparently. So I will correct myself and say that when you marry somebody, you don't automatically assume all their former debts. However, once you tie the knot in the states of Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin, if once you get through with the wedding ceremony, you sign the marriage certificate, you're married now. Okay? If after that day you go out, get a car loan, a house loan, any kind of loan, both of you are responsible. And it's called community property. Okay? In those states, they apply community property, and that means that both of you are responsible because now both of you are married. Now, I happen to live in the great state of Illinois, so that doesn't apply to me. So how does it work in the great state of Illinois? Well, if you don't live in any of the states I mentioned earlier, then it goes by common law. Here's how this one goes. As long as the both of you do not sign the contract, the only person who signs the contract is the only one responsible. So, let's just suppose, hypothetically, I ended up getting married. Afterwards, I decided to get a car loan strictly in my own name. Would the creditors go after my wife? No. They would go after me. Okay. Likewise, if my wife got onto a car loan, she would be responsible for her debt. I wouldn't, because I wouldn't sign the car loan. But traditionally, many couples, once they do get married, they do sign the contracts together, and then you really are in trouble. Okay. So there is a difference between community property and common law. So, I will correct myself on that. However, how long community property or common law lasts is going to be iffy at best. Let's say that's what the law is right now. Obviously, that's the way it is right now. Do you think it's going to be like that forever? It wasn't like that a long time ago. Let me tell you something. Eons ago, you got married, you assumed your partner's debts. That was a fact. You can go look this up in your history books. Trust me, at some point in history, it was a fact. As soon as you got married, you assumed your partner's debts. As you should in a good marriage. Now, there are some things that haven't changed. One, just because you don't owe on your spouse's debt doesn't mean that the creditors aren't going to call. They may not call your cell phone, but they're going to call your spouse on a regular basis, and it's going to drive you up the wall. So that hasn't changed. Another thing that hasn't changed is the fact that just because you're not in the debt, let me tell you something. You're going to have to drive your spouse to court if they sue her. Okay? You're still going to have to deal with the humiliation of your spouse's debt. Okay? because your spouse is paying so much in debt, you're still going to have to pay some of her expenses. You're going to have to help her fill out the paperwork, so on and so forth. So just because you don't assume her debt doesn't mean your problems are over. And let me tell you something. If you've watched those commercials of freecreditscore.com, okay, you ever seen freecreditscore.com? She can actually bring down your credit rating. That is a fact. You don't believe me? Just watch the commercials. They'll tell you, well, my spouse got into debt, so my credit score went down because of her debt. And that can happen. So just because you don't have to worry about her debt doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the clear. Those phone calls are going to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just because they're not for you doesn't mean that they're not going to drive you up the wall. Okay? And those letters are still going to come in that mailbox. Just because they're not your letters doesn't mean that you're not going to get them. Okay? You're still going to have the aggravation of her debt even though you don't have her debt. So in one sense of the term, I am correct on this. But you're still going to have to deal with the aggravation. And let me tell you something. Getting those debt letters is going to put her in a real bad mood. And that is going to affect your marriage. So, if you want to go into technicalities, fine. Let's go into technicalities. Technically speaking, if you live in a common law state, and most states are like that, then you really don't owe on her debt from previous times, and you won't owe on her debt as long as you don't sign any contracts with her. Fine. But I'm telling you what, the aggravation alone would be enough for you not to go and marry somebody like that. So, there's your correction. Hopefully you understand the point of all this. Even if you don't have to pay for her debt, you still have to live with the aggravation of her debt. You understand what I'm saying? Again, even if you don't have to pay for her debt, you're still going to have to live with the aggravation of her debt. It's going to constantly put her in a bad mood, which is going to put you in a bad mood, and it's going to cause nothing but strife and problems in your home. And that's something you don't want. So, there you go. There you have it. I will tell you more in a future video, so stay tuned.